While we welcome the cerebral palsy community to share their stories, it does not mean as an organisation we endorse and agree with all the views and decisions of our interviewees. Using both human rights and person-centred approaches, CP Diaries is a safe space that allows people from diverse experiences and backgrounds to share their stories. Please note this episode may be confronting for some, as it includes the non-disclosure of cerebral palsy. If this subject matter may distress you, please carefully consider watching this video. Welcome to another episode of CP Diaries. Recently, CPSN was approached by one of our members, Alex, who wanted to share her experiences as a mother. We discussed both her experiences during pregnancy and also how she has decided to hide her disability. This will be confronting for some who feel we should be open about our disability, but we also know her story and experience is shared by others in the disability community. We hope this story highlights an issue that still affects members of the disabled community. While the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect those views of CPSN, we ask that you respect this as Alex's story. Out of respect for Alex's privacy, some of the names in this story have been changed.
Alex, I want to thank you for being on the show today. I know that we're discussing some really personal stuff, so I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Nat. I really am pleased to be able to hopefully give you my perspective.
We'll just start with the basics. You have a couple of kids. Tell me more about that.
Yep, so I have a son and a daughter, Jack and Haley. They are 12 and 8 years of age. They're great kids. I love them very much. And I have a partner, his name's Mark, who I've been with for 17 years now.
And how did you meet Mark? If we can go on a detour.
I met Mark at a wine bar back in early 2000s when I was there with friends. And as anybody with CP would know, usually if you're at a wine bar or whatnot, you'd find yourself a nice seat somewhere and you kind of take up that corner for the evening whilst you're hanging out and chatting with friends and having a glass of wine. And that's what I was doing. And I met Mark at that point. We caught eyes across the room and he came over to chat with me. And we just got on really, really well.
I completely relate to that scenario, but let me just find a good, comfortable seat and hopefully not have to move around too much. And I think the awkward thing is if you do make eyes with someone and it's kind of got romantic feelings to it, it's like, oh, at one point I'm going to have to stand up. So what was that like for you and Mark?
Yep, so I know that this might offend some people that hear how I respond to my disability, but I just would like you to understand that that's what's worked for me over the years, and it has, I guess, protected me from those feelings of not being accepted and shame that my childhood provided or gave to me, which isn't the same kind of childhood that some of us or some of those in the community may have experienced. So when Mark first approached me and we were chatting, of course, somebody with CP and a glass of wine would generally need to go to the toilet at one point. And I remember getting up and walking off to go to the toilet and coming back. And then on the way back, there's always that apology. Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Or what happened to you? And to reduce the awkwardness, and I had been doing this since high school, I'll be honest, was I would respond with, I was in a car accident and I don't like to speak about it. And that's the end of that. Like, they generally don't want to ask any more questions and they accept me for who I am and for my difference in gait, shall we say. And we continued to talk and have a really great time and get to know each other that evening, to the point that my friend gave me my phone number and said, you two have hit it off. Maybe you should give her a call sometime, which he did.
And do you think, like, fast forward, this is something you've hung on to and you continue to do. So you meet your future husband and you tell him it was a car accident. At any point, do you tell him otherwise? Is there a point where you think, oh, it's time to tell him what actually happened?
When it doesn't come up it's really hard to then come up and say, oh, by the way, remember that night when we met at the wine bar and you asked me what was wrong and I said this? Well,
I totally get it.
It's such a weird experience. And I sat there for a long time going, well, how do I go about this? And I remember my dad saying to me at one stage, Alex, don't you think you need to tell him the truth? Just in case. He deserves to know if you two plan to have children. And that scared me. I was like, plan to have children? I don't plan to have children, sort of thing. Why would I want children? So, and then I thought of the rejection that I might feel and experience again from, I guess, childhood and adolescence. And that also scared me. So I just couldn't find the time, or could I find the words to say, I'm sorry, but I lied to you. And it's been a long period of time and I haven't been strong enough, to be honest.
So you mentioned initially at that stage you weren't even thinking about having children. What made you change your mind?
My partner is 10 years older than I am. And so he came to me and said that he actually wanted to have children and didn't want to be an old man when having when I was ready to have them. And at the time I was in my mid-20s. And I remember a surgeon saying to me when I was 12, Alex, if you ever plan on having children, I encourage you to do that before you're 30. And I never really asked why, because I also laughed at that point and thought, I'm never going to have children. And that moment, it came to me, that conversation or that statement. And I thought, maybe that's something I need to do if I am to have children. And so we went away on a holiday and we talked about it and what that would mean for us. And I guess the decision was made that yes, we'd have children. But that brought a lot more fear to me than I realised after that decision was made.
So when you say it brought fear to you, what kind of fear was it that you were having?
I guess it was a fear of what would giving birth be like for somebody with my disability. Would this mean that at the last minute of, that he finds out my truth? Shall it be the time that I tell him now? And maybe that's my way out of having children. Maybe it's his way of leaving and finding somebody else that might be more preferable to have children with. So a lot of overwhelming thoughts and feelings came up around that point of time. Interestingly enough, falling pregnant was certainly not an issue for me, because within 3 weeks, we found out that we were pregnant with my first child, which was quite stressful at the time for me, as well as a bit joyous as well. So it was a very mixed bag of emotions.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things you said there that caught my attention. The thing about the doctor saying you better have the kids before you're 30 has me freaked out, because I'm like 33 and I haven't had kids. So I'm like, oh no. And I think it's really scary because we either get very little information about what to expect when we're adults, or if we do get information, it's mixed or it's confusing or it's vague, like what you've just described. So when you did become pregnant and you started going to your appointments, I mean, did you have a discussion with your treating doctors about your diagnosis?
Yep. Lucky for me, my partner is very addicted to work. So attending appointments is not a thing that he would do often. So I spent a lot of time researching obstetricians and gynecologists. I had some friends in the field, and a friend at the time highly recommended an obstetrician that she had worked with as a midwife. And so I made an appointment there, and I had my first appointment, and I spoke to my obstetrician about my situation and that I hadn't been quite forthcoming with my diagnosis, and I didn't wish to be honest about that even at this given time. And it was the first time that I had met a doctor that was cool with it. Was just like, oh, okay, no problem. This is your story. This is your body. This is your situation. No one has to know. She goes, and reality is that I don't feel that it would be an issue from here onwards anyway, which was wrong. But it certainly made me feel confident to work with her throughout my first pregnancy.
So two things came up there. The first thing was that you said, unlike other doctors, she was cool with it. What had previous other doctors' reactions been?
I guess it was that I was morally and ethically not okay to be lying to people about what my diagnosis was, as well as for this situation that I had chosen to have a child with somebody and I couldn't tell him the truth. I was challenged by that, by doctors, and made to feel bad about that decision. Even when explaining to them, how do I come forth and say, after so many years, remember that moment we first met? It's that I actually lied, and therefore
Baby bump.
our relationship is built on lies. And then I would ask them, when would have been a good time to tell a different story? It's a really hard decision to make. And it was something that was on my mind every single day.
Yeah, that it would be really stressful. The other thing I was going to ask you is, the doctor said, well, I don't anticipate it being a problem. And you said, well, she was wrong. How was she wrong?
Well, I guess for me, initially she wanted, in conversation, she wanted me to be able to experience a natural birth. Because I guess everyone wants everyone to experience the natural birth. It's less invasive, less issues and whatnot. Well, less issues for most people, and whatnot. I guess over the months of visiting her, it came clear that, and I was very much wanting a C-section as a quick, let's have this thing planned. I want to know a day, and I don't think I want to experience labour. I experience spasms all the time. I don't think labour is going to be a lot better. If anything, it's going to be 10 times worse. So it was that negotiation of what I felt was best for me, as well as what she felt was best in practice. And she liaised with her colleagues, and they also agreed that a C-section would be preferable to reduce the risk to the baby, which was good. My first pregnancy was actually physically, I was amazing. I felt more capable than I ever had felt before. I didn't feel stiff and I didn't feel sore. The hormones helped relax my muscles, and I'm thinking, oh, this is quite good. Like, maybe this is something I should do forever. However, I did put on a lot of weight at that time, and I wish that there was maybe a conversation about you should wear appropriate shoes, because my feet did widen because I didn't wear strong appropriate shoes at the time. And the only real issue that I had throughout my first pregnancy was reflux. Obviously, baby wasn't able to sit in my pelvis, so they sat quite high, and any movement caused a lot of reflux and nausea throughout my whole pregnancy for my first time around. But other than those two symptoms, it was pretty cruisy. More so, my second pregnancy was the complete opposite.
In terms of, we talked about this a bit on the phone. So initially in those early days when you were in hospital, I think there was an issue. I mean, you raised that with them, that you didn't want to be stuck in bed, that you wanted to be up and moving. What was their take on that?
They were reluctant, so they didn't answer my call bell or any of that sort of stuff. I did have the nurse that morning actually take my call bell away and remove my phone from my reach. And at that point of time, the bed railings were still up, and I had a catheter in, which restricts your movement more so when you have CP, because pulling that out incorrectly is going to hurt and probably cause some damage. So I felt very powerless and overwhelmed. and my child was crying and I couldn't reach him or pull him out to try and feed him. And I remember just having to try and climb over my bed rails whilst holding my catheter and grabbing him to feed him. And then a student nurse came in and said, "We can't attend to you at the moment." And I remember looking at her, and I think she saw in my eyes that she better get somebody now. And so she did get somebody to come in, and they said that no, they were not going to, and it was a decision that they had made as a team, blah, blah, blah. So at that point, I then removed my own catheter, called my doctor and said, "Are you aware of this? Because this is not what we had discussed as my aftercare plan." She obviously at that point called the ward and ripped through them because it wasn't my aftercare plan and was not aware of the situation. And I had a unit manager in my room very quickly apologising for the situation and to try and, I guess, calm the situation. I was put into a much larger room, shall we say, that they would normally put other doctors and high-end clients into. It was a very nice space, but
with the worst of circumstances, I don't think it was worth the upgrade. Moving on to your second pregnancy, how was that different?
I guess with my second pregnancy, I did take longer to fall pregnant, which was fine by me. There is a bigger gap between the two of them, and that was because I wasn't sure if I was ready to go through that situation again. When I fell pregnant with my second, Hayley, I knew within 3 weeks again that I was pregnant because my body had changed and the hormones had released. But this time it caused things, my body to not cope so well. So obviously the lack of tone and the spasticity in some areas had been impacted by my first pregnancy and the lack of rehabilitation that I undertook, to that my second pregnancy, the muscle relaxant made my pelvis separate, which caused the most excruciating pain I've ever experienced. So within week 3 of falling pregnant, I knew before my pregnancy test would tell me that I was, because of the experience that I was having on my body. By week 4.5, I was in a full girdle to hold my pelvis together. And I didn't have many choices of treatment and support due to the fact that I was pregnant. So they couldn't x-ray to see how much separation had occurred in my pelvis. There wasn't any treatment that I could have other than Panadine Fort and maybe some needling and acupuncture to help through that pain and experience of my second pregnancy.
What advice did your doctors and medical team give you when all of this was happening? Did they say it could be in part due to the CP, or did they as it's pelvic separation? Is that what you'd call it?
Yeah. They said that a lot of women do experience it. One thing that they did highlight was that they were pretty blown away with the fact that I continued to work until 34 weeks and that I was still walking without a frame or crutches or in a wheelchair, where some of their other clients that had similar conditions, well, not CP as such, but had separated pelvises, were actually bedridden or in wheelchairs. So I don't know whether that kind of pushed me on to just keep on going, because I was kind of proud of my resilience and the ability to, manage the pain at such a high threshold, or whether it was my naivety.
So any part of you, because I think we've all done that to a degree, like endured a certain level of discomfort to prove a point. Is there any part of you that wishes, I should have just used a cane or a frame just for maybe the last couple of weeks to help me along?
Absolutely. For my second pregnancy, because of the high amount of pain that I was experiencing, I did fall at 34 weeks. And as I fell, I passed out. And when I came to, I was in labour. And so at that moment, I realised, oh, you've been a bit stupid. You probably should have maybe taken up on the crutches or the walking stick or even the wheelchair at this point. Because not only had I put myself in danger, I had put my unborn child in danger. I guess for me, it was also quite embarrassing to have that happen at my workplace in front of many colleagues and clients. I had to then wait for my husband to arrive to drive me to the hospital that we were planning on having our second child at. The obstetrician was aware, as I had texted them directly. And so I ended up spending a couple of days in hospital for them to try and prevent the labour that I was experiencing. It was 34 weeks. It was too soon to have the baby. But I also then would go into, spasm and whatnot, which was also causing distress in my unborn child.
Were those spasms the result of your cerebral palsy?
Yeah, so the spasms were a result of my cerebral palsy, and I also struggled to tell the difference between whether I was spasming or whether I was experiencing labour at that point, whereas I didn't have that for my first pregnancy at all. I didn't have any Braxton Hicks or anything like that, but for this one, a Braxton Hicks would set off spasms, and then it was like, well, is this me experiencing spasms or am I experiencing labour? And then I would get more and more anxious and distressed, which then would cause more distress on my, unborn child, to then cause labour to actually come forth.
So they tried to delay the labour, but couldn't. You had the child at 34 weeks.
I had her at 36. So they were successful in holding off my labour, but I was meant to be on bed rest for the next 2 weeks. And we planned to have the Caesar at 36 weeks and 3 days.
And after that labour, what was your physical health like?
So with Hayley, I had a cesarean as well. And it was interesting that after the next day, when I was allowed to get up and walk straight away, the pain that I had experienced throughout the whole pregnancy had subsided dramatically, pretty quickly actually, after giving birth to her, where the hormone changed, made a massive difference to my muscles and whatnot, and the pain that I was experiencing in my pelvis area had disappeared. So the post-pregnancy for her was very different to my first experience. I guess it was just then the after effects of, again, not taking on physiotherapy or supports in that way. But now I have a toddler and a newborn baby to care for, which was really, really quite challenging for me.
Do you, just thinking about, you talked about some of the physical differences of pregnancy. Now it's a few years on, you are older. I think you're in your late 30s.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I watched some of your other CP Diaries episodes when we first spoke. And I remember hearing one of the other parent saying after she turned 30 that it was like something happened and your body changed and there was a bit of a deterioration. And I always put it through to having my second child at the age of 30, but have learnt through this network that actually something does happen to all of us, and it's premature aging because of the way we treat our bodies or our gaits and how and so I hadn't really thought of it that way until being able to be part of this community to understand that. So I think that yes, my pregnancies and later on there has been a big repercussion for my physical health and well-being. I think that the last 2 years of the pandemic were also extremely challenging on anybody with CP or a physical disability. I think the lack of incidental exercise, going from the car park to your workplace and whatnot, has changed the way my body has been. I did have to stop working in a hospital setting as a nurse in my 30s because of things that were happening in my body changing. I had my first hip dislocation and whatnot, and so therefore I wasn't allowed to nurse as I had previously nursed before because I was at risk to myself and to my patients and my colleagues, to be 100% honest. And I was aware of that, and I actually put it on the table and withdrew from my career in that area. So I've had to recreate myself in a different career where I'm not physically active. So yes, I think that in my 30s, there has been big change for me physically. I fear my 40s at this stage because of it. Interestingly enough, I was rejected from NDIS a couple of times because I was working full time and I didn't appear to be disabled enough. But after 2020, I finally got an NDIS package, which has been absolutely amazing to be able to get some supports in place and to be able to afford things like exercise physiology, something that I couldn't afford to do before because I prioritised that money that I could have spent on myself, on my children. Yes, those things have impacted me. My children have chosen sports that the terrain is challenging for me to walk through. One does mountain biking, and I'll have to be honest, Falls Creek is certainly not made for somebody like me to navigate and go and watch, or other areas around Australia. And my daughter has decided that horse riding is her choice sport. And I would love to be able to ride with her, but I haven't been able to do that because of my pelvis separation from my pregnancy with her. And it was something I did do as a child. So I guess I'm living through them, but I have to live through watching from the car.
Can I ask, how do I think, because I've always tried to imagine what it would be like if I ever do become a mum, and I think one of my deepest fears would be like reactions from other parents. How have the other parents been?
It's interesting because my children have moved schools because of, I guess, these experiences. The mothers and some of the fathers at some of the others, and we've been to 2 different schools. Jack has been to that school and another school, and Hayley had also been to another school before she joined Jack. So it was interesting to see there is a difference. In the public sector, I found that the parents were more judgmental and non-accepting of me as their parent or of my children. Birthday parties were difficult in the sense of, if it was at our house, I felt like that they all had stayed if they did come, but they didn't feel that it was going to be safe to be left in my care. So we would always have it at, a play centre or bounce. God forbid that place is torture for a parent like me.
Nieces and nephews, don't get me started.
Yeah. And I can't walk on the floors in those places like gymnastics because of their bouncy and whatnot. So it meant that I couldn't participate in party activities.
It's harder for you. It's ironic when they make up their solution and their solution is actually creating it more difficulties.
Yeah. So there's things that I guess I've had to adapt and move to and work with. over the years. And I don't know whether it would be any different for if they knew it was CP or whether they, continue to believe that it was a motor vehicle accident. I have, in the recent couple of years, moved my children to a private school, an independent private school, which is terribly expensive and means that I have to work full time. However, the kids and the families are different. They have welcomed me with open arms. They've offered me support. At times when they know that I'm running late or I am working at work late that day or whatever it might be, they'll offer to pick up my children and drop them off at home or keep them at their house and they can have dinner there. My kids have been having parties at home without the parents all congregating to, question whether Alex is okay to supervise them and whatnot. So I've had a very different.
Yeah, that is one of my fears. That one gets me.
To find your own tribe or families that will accept or exclude, I think has been the most challenging part of being a parent.
Yeah. Just thinking, we've covered a lot of territory here. Looking back on becoming a parent, is there anything you feel you would have done differently?
I think I would have understood my body and my condition better. I think I would have done prenatal exercises and maybe had gotten into physio or Pilates before I decided to have a child. I think I would have then liked to have continued that after having a child, or been more aware of prioritizing that as a really important factor for me to ensure that I am strong and capable to do some of the things that I need to do as a parent, as well as just to have a better overall health and well-being of myself, so that I can be the best parent that I can possibly be without being in so much pain or grumpy at the end of the day because I'm so fatigued and tired. So I think if I could do it all over again, those would be the things that I would do. I would invest in me. I would invest in Pilates. I would invest in a physio. I'd invest in an exercise physiologist to help support me keep strong.
Yeah.
And I guess I can't even put words to it. I think the NDIS would have made a major difference. And I think that young women and men with CP now have got an opportunity that if they do choose to have children, that they could possibly be able to have a better outcome physically in the long term because of it's a little bit more financially and more accessible than what it was for me.
Is there anything you feel we've left out worth mentioning?
If you are considering having a child, be aware that yes, your physical abilities are going to be different to mine, and the outcomes and side effects or whatnot will be different, and some may be similar. I guess you'll never know any other love that you have ever felt for your own children until you have them. And I'll do anything for my children. So if you're fearful of just what might happen to your body, I think that the feeling you have as a parent will take that away.
I think that's a good note to end on. Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Nat, and thank you, community, for hearing my story.
CPSN acknowledges that people with CP can experience stigma and shame, so we encourage respect for all people with CP, as inherent dignity will empower them to access the appropriate support and services. Dignity and respect can only be achieved by promoting, protecting, and ensuring the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. We value your feedback and experiences. If you have any questions, please use the following links below to contact the appropriate communication channels. So, if you want to share your experience or share your story, please send us a direct message. We'd love to hear your story.